Mother's Day has a way of sneaking up on you. But when it does, 1-800-Flowers makes it easy to send Mom something beautiful, thoughtful, and worthy of everything she does. Right now, with double blooms from 1-800-Flowers, order 1 dozen roses and get another dozen for free. It's a bigger gesture with fresh, beautiful flowers arranged to make Mother's Day feel as special as she is. Make Mother's Day feel bigger with double blooms at 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast.
I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elise Sharp.
And we are 2 nerds who are here to make Shakespeare easier to understand.
In this podcast, we will explore as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which the plays were written, and how his plays are viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as theater makers, how his plays can be responsibly performed today, all while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to bardolatry.
So, Shakespeare, anyone?
Hi, listeners. Want to support Shakespeare Anyone? Visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. Now, onto the episode.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Elise.
How are you today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, yeah.
Yeah. But super excited because even though we're doing all right and okay,
yes,
we have a super episode today.
I'm so excited about this episode. I'm just like a little bit sleepy. That's all when we're recording.
Relatable.
That's where the okay is coming from. But this episode, this conversation was so interesting and exciting and sort of like a new way of looking at Shakespeare that I had never even considered was possible before. We're talking today to Caroline Bicks. Caroline Bicks is the Stephen E. King Chair in Literature at the University of Maine, where she teaches courses in Shakespeare, early modern culture, and horror fiction. She is the author of Cognition and Girlhood in Shakespeare's World, and Midwiving Subjects in Shakespeare's England, co-author of Shakespeare Not Stirred, Cocktails for Your Everyday Dramas, and co-host of the Everyday Shakespeare podcast. Her essays and humor pieces have appeared in the Modern Love column of the New York Times, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and the show Afterbirth. She lives in Blue Hill, Maine with her family. And we are talking to her today about her new book that is out now called Monsters in the Archives, My Year of Fear with Stephen King. After Caroline Bicks was named the University of Maine's inaugural Stephen E. King Chair in Literature, she became the first scholar to be granted extended access by King to his private archives, a treasure trove of manuscripts that document the legendary writer's creative process, most of them never before studied or published. The year she spent exploring King's early drafts and handwritten revisions was guided by one question millions of King's enthralled and terrified readers, including her, have asked themselves. What makes Stephen King's writing stick in our heads and haunt us long after we've closed the book? Bicks focuses on 5 of his most iconic early works, The Shining, Carrie, Pet Sematary, Salem's Lot, and Night Shift, to reveal how he crafted his language, storylines, and characters to cast his enduring literary spells. While tracking King's margin notes and editorial changes, she discovered scenes and alternative endings that never made it to print, but that King is allowing her to publish now. The book also includes interviews Bicks had with King along the way that reveal new insights into his writing process and personal history. Part literary masterclass, part biography, part memoir, and investigation into our deepest anxieties, Monsters in the Archives, authorized by Stephen King himself, is unlike anything ever published about the master of horror. It chronicles what Bicks found when she set out to unearth how King crafted some of his scariest, most iconic moments. But it's also a story about a grown-up English professor facing her childhood fears and getting to know the man whose monsters helped unleash them. Now, you might be thinking, this isn't a Stephen King podcast. How does this relate to Shakespeare? Well, through our conversation, Caroline shares how she discovered how Shakespeare influenced Stephen King and some running themes and commonalities that King's work and Shakespeare's share, along with similarities between the writers.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said at the top, Caroline is a Shakespeare scholar.
Hmm.
And so this was just so fascinating to hear how Shakespeare, Stephen King, these horror stories, these two authors or writers who just permeate society are intertwined. And as somebody who has read Stephen King before, I've read, I don't know, half a dozen or more of his books. It was really cool to be able to look at the stories with Shakespeare in mind and
Yeah,
take a closer look at Stephen King through the lens of Shakespeare, just like how we take such deep looks at Shakespeare through all these other lenses.
you just took the words out of my mouth. Our brains are on the same wave. I was like, while we usually look at Shakespeare through different lenses, this is an episode where we're going to be turning the table and looking at a contemporary writer through the lens of Shakespeare with Caroline Bicks. If you are interested in getting your hands on a copy of Monsters in the Archives, My Year of Fear with Stephen King by Caroline Bicks, we have a link to the book in our episode description. The link will take you to our bookshop.org storefront where you can find all books featured on the podcast. And now, enjoy the episode. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Elise. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about talking with you about Shakespeare and Stephen King.
We're really excited to have you and to hear more about their connections and what you have done as sort of a first in the field.
I would hope that maybe I'm the first, but you never know. There could be someone doing something, toiling away, not getting the recognition they deserve. So I will say I'm the first one to get recognition. So I'm very grateful for that I had the opportunity to be. I am the inaugural Stephen E. King Chair in Literature at the University of Maine. So that I can say for sure I am the first, which is, again, a total honor. I'm very grateful to have that opportunity.
So let's get started. Before you were the inaugural Stephen E. King Chair in Literature at the University of Maine, what was your first experience with Shakespeare?
Wow. Okay. Well, we probably have to go back to sixth grade when, unfortunately, at my school, they had us reading Julius Caesar, which I don't think is a great gateway play. It was an all-girls school, so not the best female characters in that play. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're certainly not. It's not a great, I didn't think it was a great on-ramp, let's just say. So that was my first experience, was read it. We had to, of course, memorize Friends, Romans, Countrymen. So I guess it had a plus in that we were all, had to memorize something. I would say the next play we read, I think that was seventh grade, was Twelfth Night. That got me into it. I was like, okay, now I see. This is a 13-year-old girl. I'm starting to feel the vibe. I get why Shakespeare is so cool. And then the next year we did Macbeth. And then it was like, I'm sold.
Oh. I love that you sort of had a very closely in age variety, like a charcuterie board of Shakespeare.
I love that. That's right. It was a charcuterie board. Yeah.
Here's a Roman play. Here's a comedy. Here's a dark tragedy. And I love that Macbeth was the one that sort of hooked you, because I think we're going to be talking about that one probably a little bit later today. It's going to come up a few times maybe in our conversation.
And that makes you and Elise kindred spirits because Macbeth was the play for Elise as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you not fall in love with Shakespeare with that play? Because the language, the poetry, I had such incredible teachers, and they all just got us hooked into the power of the verse. And Macbeth.
I think it's, I could
So
go on
beautiful.
for, we could derail this entire conversation talking about.
I'm fine with that. I mean, this is
Macbeth
your podcast, so I'll take any journey you want. You just tell me where you want to go.
They've heard it. They've heard how I think Macbeth is more of a perfect play than Hamlet.
Oh, I'm 100% on that.
There's no, you don't need to edit down.
Nope.
It is very tight, like as a story, as a script. It's really just like everything you need is in there.
It's not a wasted word.
No time wasted, and it just sort of is really incredible. So I'd love to, jumping forward. So in 2017, you were named the inaugural Stephen E. King Chair in Literature at the University of Maine. How has this position impacted your scholarship and ultimately led to the writing of your new book, Monsters in the Archives?
Yeah. So, I am a Shakespearean. That's how I was trained. And I was hired at UMaine as a Shakespearean. So just to be clear, that this endowed chair had nothing to do with finding a scholar of Stephen King or horror. He was our most famous alum in the English department at UMaine. And so when the chair was endowed by the Harold Alfond Foundation, which was an incredible gift, they endowed it in his name. But again, the department was looking for a Shakespearean. So in terms of when I first entered the position, it didn't change anything about what I was doing with my scholarship. I was in the middle of writing a book that has since come out called Cognition and Girlhood in Shakespeare's World. My research, I was doing a deep dive into cognitive beliefs about girls and teenagers during Shakespeare's day and in his plays. It was a passion project. I've been working on it for 10 years. And when I was doing my job talk at UMaine, actually, I was talking about that book, but I was thinking, maybe even though they're not looking for anyone who does Stephen King, it would be a nice gesture to bring Stephen King into the job talk somehow. So I couldn't believe it. I was thinking, well, I know Stephen King writes kids really well. And it had been probably 40 years since I'd read Carrie, but I thought, Carrie's his first teenage character girl. And I know, obviously, she's doing a lot with her brain. So I just opened up Carrie, and I swear to God, the first page it opened to was where he describes her experiencing mental puberty, which was basically the thesis of my whole book that I was working on about Shakespeare and how girls' brains become so active and not pathological, actually, during Shakespeare's day. So that became like my hook into Stephen King through a scholarly lens, which was really like, that's, and then I kind of let that lie. I got the job, which was great. But it was 4 years before I actually got a phone call from Stephen King. I didn't think I'd ever meet him or talk to him. And he felt like it was time we meet. So once that happened, and that was 4 years into my holding this position. This is a long way to your question, but sort of like how I got to this book, I was 4 years in. I had a lovely conversation with him. I invited him to come speak with our students. It was magic. I write about all this in the introduction to the book. And then I had a sabbatical year coming, which doesn't happen very often, at least not in my world. And the Kings had just collected as many of the manuscripts as they had into a climate-controlled space, attached it to their iconic home in Bangor, and they hadn't yet opened it up to anyone outside their family and foundation. And I was getting to know them. I think they were getting to trust me. And I said, you know what? I've got this sabbatical year coming. I have a Shakespeare idea for a book, but I think I just want to put that aside because this seems like opportunity knocking, right? I said, can I just spend the year reading the first drafts of 5 of the books that scared me the most when I was a teenager? Could I just do that? Could I spend that year doing that? And they said yes. So I was like, well, I've got to do this. This is incredible opportunity for me. And also, I love Stephen King's books. Like they still were in my head after, 40 years later. And I, as a Shakespeare scholar, what got me interested was I wanted to understand how his language got into my head and stuck. Not the movies, because those are different, right? A movie, you see a movie, it's like, I can't look away, it's in my head. That's different. For me, I was really intrigued by, I meet Shakespeare fans all over, but I meet more Stephen King fans. And you talk to anyone, and you don't even have to be a Stephen King fan, just anyone who grew up in the 70s and the 80s, people read these books. They were the books that you read. It's like V.C. Andrews or, like you read Stephen King books as they came out. And whoever I would speak to, they all had a different specific word or phrase that they remembered from the book. Like it had imprinted on their brains. So the project really came out of my love of how language imprints on your brain if it's crafted in a particularly intentional way, like Shakespeare's poetry, right? And so I just dove in. And that's a long way to your question, how did this position impact my scholarship? That it definitely opened up my mind more. Although I'd been my partner in crime, Michelle Ephraim, who's brilliant, who's a Shakespeare professor at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. We had been working together, bringing Shakespeare to a more public-facing, humorous space for 10 years with our blog, and then we wrote a Shakespeare cocktail book, and then we have our Everyday Shakespeare podcast. So I was already thinking about public-facing scholarship. And this was a great way to do it because, of course, Stephen King is a public-facing writer, even though he's also a brilliant artist. He, from the beginning, has been a public-facing writer, like Shakespeare.
For me, I was like, oh, these are things that I've never put together of, you were talking about the language. I was like, but also there's, like Shakespeare, King has created stories that have so much cultural capital, have permeated our culture in such a way that even if you are not a horror fan, like myself, you don't engage with it in any way, you still probably have an idea of what it is.
Yes.
You probably have an idea of Carrie and Misery and
The Shining. I
The
mean,
Shining.
that's probably
Shining
that's like dominant because of the Kubrick film. But yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly the right phrase, the one you used, right? It's cultural capital. It's about Shakespeare and King both. If you had to make a list of the top 10 writers of the past 500 years who continue to have cultural capital, those two would top the list. So that was another question that drove what I was doing with the book. I wanted to understand why. Why? I mean, yeah, I understood the language question, but what was it about the stories? Because especially for Stephen King, it's not like he invented the vampire novel, right?
Yeah.
But Salem's Lot sticks, right? He didn't invent the haunted mansion motif, right? But the Overlook Hotel looms large. So I also was really interested in thinking about what is it about how he's telling the story that makes it stick. And one of the things I really came to appreciate doing these deep dives and talking to him as well is that it's not about jump scare, gruesome parts of his books that I think stick with people. I mean, yes, they are gruesome and horrible, but it's the way that they connect to very human, real experiences of grief in particular. Grief, trauma. Yeah, and he writes about this really eloquently. He has a great book called Dance Macabre that he wrote in the early 1980s. That's one of his few nonfiction books that's about what his philosophy is about the role that horror and ghost stories play in our emotional lives. And he writes really eloquently about that. I mean, we all know this, or anyone who's experienced trauma understands you can't look at it head on. Your brain just won't metabolize it, and it's going to impact how you remember your traumatic events. You're going to remember it not as a continuous narrative. You'll remember it in dreams or in flashes or and he understands that. When you go back to a book like Pet Sematary, which is the book I started with, which is by his own account, the most horrifying book he ever wrote. It's one he actually put in a drawer and was like, I can't publish this. It's too horrible. And it's one that a lot of readers of Stephen King cite that one as the one that's too horrible. Because it is. It's about a very real, horrible event, the death of a child. Arguably, like when I think about Macbeth, I don't know how you feel about this, Elise, but like for me, Macbeth, the most painful scene ever written in all of Shakespeare, possibly in all of literature, is the scene where Macduff finds out that his family's been killed. And it's like I'm getting chills even thinking about the language that he uses to express that when he's like, all, what, all my chickens?
But I must also feel it like a man.
But I also have to feel it as a man is probably one of my favorite lines. He's like, he's like, he has no children. He doesn't understand. It's just, it's like, like that to me is the most horrifying scene in maybe in all of Shakespeare.
It's one that gives you the ice water in your guts feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like I cry when when I'm teaching that play to my students, I'm always like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm crying again. Like it's just because he just got how to use language to express something that is just the worst thing you could imagine. Right? That's the horrible imaginings in the play. It's not the ghosts.
Which Shakespeare also experienced himself.
Right. I mean, I think this is why Hamnet has such a big cultural reach right now. Right? That movie, the book is beautiful. The fact that Maggie O'Farrell also co-wrote the screenplay, it shows because that film is just, I think people get it now. Like they're like, oh, like people who don't like Shakespeare or never read Shakespeare or got taught it in a way that they don't like it. They see that film and they get it. They're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like he tapped into, even though that's her making up something, it is based in real things that happened to Shakespeare. We know his son died when he was 11. We know he wrote Hamlet right afterwards.
Shortly after, yeah.
So it's like, of course it's impacting how he's telling this story.
Yeah. In every single character, we have somebody in a different stage of grief.
Yeah.
Making a decision that is the wrong decision. This is somebody who has been through a long grieving process and is sort of reflecting back. And to ignore it is to not consider the author, the playwright, a human being.
Right. And to go back to Stephen King for a second, I mean, Pet Sematary, that's the moral heart of Pet Sematary is when you make bad decisions because of grief. I mean, that's Louis Creed is making a bad decision by unburying his son and reburying him. But it's because of grief.
Right.
Yeah. And in grief, you don't make decisions that make sense. And we've sort of started on this thread. So I'm going to ask the question, we've talked about this connection of grief between Pet Sematary and Hamlet now. You briefly talked about Carrie and girlhood and adolescence in Shakespeare's day. What other surprising connections have you found between Shakespeare's works and King's works, or Shakespeare and King as writers?
Right. There were so many surprises. It was such an incredible, fun experience going into those archives. I had zero idea what I was going to find. I didn't even know what drafts they had. I didn't even know what a draft looked like. I'd never seen a Stephen King draft. I certainly had never seen a Shakespeare draft, right? So this was really new work for me. So when I went in, I, was so thrilled that day one, and I decided I was just going to start with Pet Sematary, and I write about that in the first chapter, why I did that. They had this incredible manuscript. It was the second to last manuscript draft of Pet Sematary, and it had all of the copy editor's sticky note questions to King and his responses. And what was just phenomenal was seeing how much care he took about the word choices he was making, and how it wasn't just about the meaning of the word, it was the sound of the word. And he would write there's these beautiful notes to the copy editor. He would respond, like when the copy editor would circle. One of my favorite anecdotes is when, I don't know if you know Pet Sematary, but there's a dream sequence when Lewis is taken across something called a deadfall and into the Pet Sematary by one of the students at Maine who had just been killed, and because he's the new health center physician. And the deadfall, he sees it and it looks like it's made up of bones. And he describes it as that the bones clittered. And the copy editor circles clitter and says, "Do you mean clatter?" And he writes back. He says, "No." He says, "It's clitter." He says, "A clitter is a soft, ghostly clatter." And it was so phenomenal. I thought, wow, I'd never even heard of the word clitter. And I just started saying it in my clitter, 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 right? I was like, of course, it's a soft, ghostly clatter. It's the perfect word choice for this dream sequence that is kind of fuzzy and, it's not, to have bones making that clittering sound is so perfect. So that's what got me thinking, because there were so many examples of that in his comments to the copy editor. And there was a wonderful moment in an exchange where he's talking to the copy editor through writing and he says, "Say it out loud, you'll see." He's trying to explain. It's almost like, if you say it out loud, you'll see what I mean. So he's thinking about word sound. And then when I was having conversations with King about this, he would be like, yeah, it matters to me. That's probably one of the first things I pay attention to when I'm revising is the sound of the word, how it clangs on the reader's ear, which is another just great image, right? So in terms of connections to Shakespeare, that was something, obviously I can't talk to Shakespeare. I don't know if he was thinking those same things, but he certainly was creating those same sound baths, right? or sound effects, or, assaulting his readers at certain points through that sound, right? And of course, because his works are meant to be heard, that makes sense. But what was amazing was that you can also have that impact. You can be thinking about that as someone who's writing with the intent to have his works read, not heard necessarily. But he seems to understand that you hear words in your head when you're reading. So I was really blown away by that connection to Shakespeare. And then as I was reading and seeing, in some of the early drafts, like in The Shining, and this is something I write about, there's that first draft of The Shining that no one's ever written about because they haven't had access to it. It's incredible. It's an incredible first draft. There's a lot of Shakespeare in there. He's really well read. I mean, he's better read than anyone I've ever met. Certainly better read than I am. He knows everything from Wallace Stevens to Andrew Marvell to Shakespeare to, he's very elusive in his writing. But there's a lot of Shakespeare embedded in, especially some of the early drafts. Sometimes he'll take them out, but you can still feel the effect of the Shakespeare in the stories.
You've piqued my curiosity of The Shining, the Shakespeare that was in there. Where else you found it in his works?
Yeah. So in The Shining, I'm not going to give away the big reveal because
sure.
This is one of the great fun things in the book was when he told me which Shakespearean tragedy he was thinking of when he imagined The Shining, which when I found that, I was like, because The Shining is probably my favorite of his books. That's the one that really sticks with me. So when I found out that he had actually was imagining a Shakespearean tragedy when he imagined that story, that just blew my mind. I will give away that I thought it was Macbeth because there were some Macbeth references in the first draft that he ended up taking out. So I was like, well, it's got to be Macbeth, right? It's a story full of ghosts and horrible brain bashing, right? Like Lady Macbeth. This has got to be Macbeth. It turns out it was not. Macbeth was not the first one he was imagining, but it was still in there. But he did end up taking that out. You know, what was really interesting for me was when I was working on Carrie, when he was revising Carrie, what he added in was a lot of Macbeth. And that was, in some ways, that makes sense, but it was not necessarily the parts of Macbeth that you would think. You know, it wasn't necessarily about like the bloodiest parts of Macbeth. It was actually the final scene of Carrie before you hit like sort of the postscript part of the book, when Sue is, you know, finds Carrie lying on the ground dying and has that, you know, mind meld with her, which really speaks to me in terms, again, the power of girls' brains, right? The adolescent female brain is something that, again, is not just pathological. It's something that actually is like a gateway to all of these other, it's like a lightning rod for all of these connections. And in the first draft of that scene, Sue is just terrified of Carrie. She's just like, you know, Carrie has like a giant alien head. The head like explodes and Sue just is like running away from it. And she's like, right? That's what she is afraid she'll never be able to forget, is the vision of Carrie's head exploding, right? But in the final, you know, once King's done really humanizing Carrie in his revisions, what Sue has to experience is the feeling of dying that Carrie's having. You know, Carrie has hold of her mind, and Carrie's like, you're going to feel this with me. And that's the most horrible thing, is that Sue experiences like a candle going down a dark corridor is how King writes it. And then it's like, and then it goes, it just disappears, it just goes, and then there's nothing. And I was like, hello, end of Macbeth.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that was basically the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech, which, again, he doesn't say the word Macbeth when he's describing that, but it's so clearly Macbeth influenced. And one of my final conversations I had with him, we had a great conversation about that. And it was a really powerful moment for me to be able to bring my Shakespeare spidey sense to Carrie and talk to the master of horror about how he was influenced by Shakespeare.
I'll just say that, like, that's so fascinating because, like, as a teenager and a young adult, I've read a handful of King books. Yeah. And so I'm so fascinated to revisit some of these King novels because that wasn't in my mind when I was reading The Shining or Carrie. I'm so excited because this is a cool layer that, you know, you've been able to find this intersection between these two very prominent authors.
Yeah, well, thank you. And, you know, that's amazing. Like, if people want to go back and read Stephen King again with fresh eyes, that's awesome, you know, because I think he will always have his fans. But I think, you know, there are people who think, oh, he just spews out prose. He just spews out a book, you know, to make money. I don't even know if he writes his books. How could he write all those books? It's like, no, he's writing his books. Okay. It's the same crap people say about Shakespeare, right? How could he have written, how could this dude from Stratford who didn't go to university? I mean, Stephen King went to university, but it wasn't a fancy university. You know, Shakespeare, you know, same criticisms are laid against both. That's why I see these two men as really having similar kinds of trajectories.
Yeah. Know? And in their own times writing a, you know,
popular
pop culture.
Pop culture. Absolutely.
Yeah. Horror is not necessarily seen as this like highbrow literature.
No.
I'm using air quotes for everybody who's listening.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, you think about Macbeth. I mean, that's a play that, you know, Macbeth knew his audience. He was like, hey, sure, let's put in some witches. You know, King James, I know he likes himself some witches. We'll put in some witch scenes. You know, it's like, it's okay to be thinking about audience and what's going to be popular. And you can still write great art. Like, you could still craft beautiful language. Like, they don't have to be exclusive, mutually exclusive. And I think horror is having more of its day now. I think now that there's more of an appreciation for genre bending, and, you know, horror is not being siloed as much.
Yes.
You know, we're talking about eco horror as we're dealing with the horrors of what's happening with, you know, global climate collapse. And, you know, I think there are ways that people are opening themselves up a little more, that those silos are being a little more broken down. But I think, yeah, definitely. If one result of my book is that people are going back to Stephen King's books and giving them more of their due, great. You know, that's a win. Hey, and even better if they want to also go back to Shakespeare and think about, or if they've been avoiding Shakespeare, you know, and want to give it a kind of Stephen King little look, great.
I love to see Shakespeare tragedies considered through the lens of like modern horror.
Yeah.
Because often when I'm working on them, I find this feels like a psychological thriller, or this feels like, we've talked about it with the revenge plays of like Titus Andronicus. Like
Yeah.
these were the early modern versions of a like slasher film. And
Yeah.
people think like, oh, Titus Andronicus, like how could Shakespeare have written that? It's so gruesome.
Yeah, he didn't do it.
That was what was popular. This is his version of
Saw.
what was popular at the time. Everybody's writing a Saw.
Right. And there's still incredible speeches in Titus Andronicus. Tamora's opening speech about her children is like a heartbreaker. So you can do both at the same time. What is really interesting, I'm glad you brought up Titus, because I love Titus.
Yeah.
It's obviously a very disturbing play, but in some ways, like when I was reading early King and looking at like early drafts of something like *Salem's Lot*, which is his second published novel. So he's actually writing it around the same time he's writing Carrie, but it doesn't get published until the year after Carrie comes out. But you can see him. I haven't really given this a whole lot of thought, so this is just sort of an inchoate idea. But I was thinking, he pares away a lot of the gore as he drafts *Salem's Lot*. Like he kind of takes away the more like in your face Dracula baby Randy getting like his body exploding. I mean, like he takes away a lot of that as he's recrafting *Salem's Lot*. And it's interesting to think about like Titus Andronicus as one of his first plays, right? Like, did he start? And he probably co-wrote it with George Peele, which is fine. Like collaboration happens, it's great. But I think Shakespeare as well is probably figuring out you don't need to show all the gore. Like it's okay, you can still be scary and suspenseful, and maybe even more so if you don't show the limbs getting ripped off and thrown into the oven or like what.
Yeah.
It's possible that they were having similar kinds of like, that's not challenging enough as an artist, right?
Or how can we do this without, the paying the Butchers Guild for our blood budget,
Right. It could have just been a practical decision. Yeah. It's like we're looking to save money on the blood budget. I love that.
He was a producer too, so, he had to look at his bottom line.
Yeah, that is brilliant. I love that.
Just to bring it back to King for just a second, he recently posted on Threads that Monsters in the Archives is, quote, the best book about his process that he has ever read, unquote. High praise.
Yeah. I mean, I'm literally like, I'm going to just die right now. Like, there's nothing more.
I'd be shaking.
I was. It was unbelievable. And so he was so gracious of him to, first of all, I mean, like, wow.
Yeah.
It was really gratifying to hear that, just because he had read the whole book because he needed to read the book just to give he never interfered with anything I was writing. He's a very generous person with writers. And it meant so much to me that he just trusted me. And he was like, you know what? He didn't necessarily agree with my interpretations. He never said he didn't. But, it's like he would never say, you can't, what are you talking about? That's not what I was thinking about. He just he gave me a lot of free rein, which I really appreciated. And, he had emailed me before that and just said, this is great. And in our conversations, he said, you've breathed fresh life into this, which really just meant the world to me, because as an academic, of course, one of the things that people think about academics is that we're just like stuck in our little silos, to use that word again. We don't know how to speak to anybody. We're navel gazers. King himself has said this about academics. So, I was nervous. I was like, is he going to think I'm just a navel gazer? Or that, as he's written in On Writing, that I'm just taking beautiful butterflies and like sticking pins in them and killing them, So that meant so much to me, obviously, when I saw that comment, because I thought, okay, that's definitely a once in a lifetime, right? I'm not going to have that experience again, I doubt. And I'm grateful. I'm just really grateful.
Yeah.
You should print and frame that tweet.
Yeah. Frame that. But also I want to know, with this praise of, your depiction of his process, you've spoken about the back and forth he has with copy editors. What other aspects of his process did you discover in your research? Without revealing too much.
Yeah. I think if it's okay with you, what I'd love to do is talk about what I learned from actually talking to him too.
Yeah.
Because, there's so many things I could talk about in terms of the manuscripts and things I saw, like paring away the gore and, picking particular words or changing a plot line to make it even more psychologically disturbing. But for me, I had a lot of favorite moments writing this book, and most of them were unpredictable. I didn't know they were coming. And one was when I was working on *Salem's Lot*. each time I went in, I went book by book, and I didn't know what part of what I was trying to do was to find a story behind each of the books, like something that I could center my analysis around, but also something that would reveal something new about his process, but something that would connect it to the human, because that's really important. That's a thread through this whole book. Like, again, this is why horror endures when it's written really well, is because it just connects us to one another and to our experiences as humans. And so I was having a conversation with him about Durham, which is where Salem's Lot, the town, is based on Durham, Maine, which is the town he moved to when he was 11 with his mother and his older brother. His father had left the family when he was 2. He's never seen him again. But they had left the state of Maine when he was 2, after his father left, and the 3 of them had moved all around the country. And I didn't really know that, or I hadn't really paid attention to it. And then we were talking about what it was like for him to move to Durham, Maine at age 11. So that's sort of the return to Maine for him. And he talked about that town with such love and affection, and he was talking about, he had this great line. He had a lot of great lines from that conversation that we had that really helped me find another layer to Salem's Lot, where he talked about he just fell in love with the town. He said, at first I hated it. That's what he said, because he had been living in Stratford, Connecticut. He was like, what are these dirt roads? There's nothing here. He says, I hated it. He said, and then I came to love it. And then as we were talking, he said, you come to Maine through rock. And I thought, well, that's a gorgeous line. Like, did you just come up with that? Like, what does that even mean? And he was like, it's about the mindset of the people. It's about the land. It's about the whole, it's a Maine thing. And then he said, but, don't eviscerate the metaphor. Like, it's not good to eviscerate metaphors. And I was like, but I have to. Are you kidding? That's an amazing metaphor. I didn't say that to him, but I'm like, well, that's the metaphor that's going to take me into Salem's Lot. Like, I can't let go of that. It's a beautiful, mysterious, poetic way to talk about it. But it's also a great way to talk about something that's hard, but also that you love, right? And so that got me into Salem's Lot, the novel. I started thinking, wow, because as he's revising that, you see all the layers of loving the town and hating the town all at the same time, right? And you also see, of course, one of the main characters is a 12-year-old boy, Mark Petrie. And the main character is Ben Mears, a novelist who comes back to his hometown, but he had spent some magical years there between the ages of, 8, 9, 10. I'm like, okay, this is the heart of this chapter I'm going to write. I don't know yet exactly, but I found the heart, because this is about what it means to come home again, to love a hometown. And for King especially, because it connects to his mother who brought him there. His mother got cancer when she was living there and then left the town. He said, she would stay there until the cancer got her. And she did. She stayed there until she ended up moving to Mexico, Maine, to be with her other son. I don't know if you know Salem's Lot, but, that ends with Ben Mears and Mark Petrie going together to Mexico. So I just was thinking there's so much here about place and emotion and location. It's not about the vampires. Like, the vampires are like a sideshow. It's really about your relationship to place and trauma and how those two really speak to each other and are embedded in each other. And like, you come to Maine through rock, right? That place, it's the rockiness of your own emotions, your own history, but it's also the rockiness of the land and the rockiness of the people in the town. So that's one example of what I learned about his process. And I'm not saying he did that with every single one of his novels, but it did just make me appreciate that it's never just about a monster or about a gimmick, right? It's about some deeper human emotional connection that you have to either a place or to a person or to a part of yourself.
Wow. I think that was such a beautiful way to peel back some of his process and give us a taste of what we're going to find in your book. And I want to leave us with that. But before we go, you've also authored a Shakespeare-themed cocktail book.
Yeah.
Shakespeare Not Stirred. So if you had to pick a cocktail to pair with Monsters in the Archives, what would it be?
Oh, gosh.
Or several.
I mean, so, you sent me that question ahead of time and I could not stop thinking about it. I was like, okay, the next book I need to write is a Stephen King themed cocktail book if nobody's done it before, because it's just, how can you stop once you start thinking about that? And I want to give a shout out to Michelle Ephraim, who was my co-author for that book. Cocktails for Your Everyday Dramas was the subtitle. So, of course, my brain immediately went to and this is not original actually. I was the red rum. I mean, you have to have a red rum drink.
Oh.
That's sort of a gimme. But then I thought Carrie's pomegranate punch. Okay. So it's going to be red, obviously. It's going to have pomegranate, but it's got the pomegranate pun. And then then my brain started going beyond the book. I started thinking about it and thinking about the town of Derry. And I was like, okay, well, we have to have Pennywise's dairy-free mudslide. Because Pennywise, Derry, of course, free. And I thought Pennywise is always trying to escape Derry, those kids in Derry, right? So, but the mudslide, it just seemed evocative. I haven't thought it all through yet, but that's often it will just start as a pun and then go from there. So I couldn't stop. And then I was like, what about the Jack Rose for The Shining? Anyway, we're going to stop now because I could just do a whole episode with you about that.
Well, I'm excited for when we have you on to talk about your, Stephen King, Shaken Not Stirred. Yeah,
right. We'll see. Shining Not Stirred. I mean, what would it be called? I don't know. Yeah, it's hard.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Caroline.
Thank you.
We will put information about how to get Monsters in the Archives in our show description for this episode.
Yeah.
And as always, thank you for listening.
I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elise Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Never Ending Minute by Sounds Like Sander.
If you would like to support us, visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. You can also hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it. For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, or follow us on Instagram at ShakespeareAnyonePod.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here is a completely random Shakespeare quote for you.
Hi, I'm Caroline Bicks, and I have selected a couple lines from King John, Act 3, Scene 4, and these are lines said by Constance. Seems especially appropriate talking about horror and grief being connected. Grief fills the room up of my absent child, lies in his bed, walks up and down with me, puts on his pretty looks, repeats his words, remembers me of all his gracious parts, stuffs out his vacant garments with his form. Then have I reason to be fond of grief.